Hey there, welcome. Sorry for the delay, but glad to have you here. Uh, my name is Jim Tincher. I am the CEO at Heart of the Customer and overall customer experience geek, author of Do B2B Better, and pleased today to share the stage with Roxie Strohmenger, one of my favorite customer experience leaders. So, Roxie, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Roxie Strohmenger. Been a fellow geek with Jim for a really long time, almost 15 plus years, really focused on emotion centered CX transformations that create those personalized, scalable experiences that most importantly impact financials. Really looking forward to talking about I think our favorite topic, which is the power of data.
All right, excellent. Before we hop into the questions, I'm going to share a little bit about what do we mean about what I call the customer ecosystem data. And it's really the four types of data that we see great CX programs are using to measure their experience. And so, first of all, when we talk about a mature organization, we start by looking at your customers' behaviors. Some view this as, I think Roxy views this as another form of voice of customer, and I agree. Um, and then that predicts the financials, what your organization sees. Now, to get there, we look at the operations and, of course, the sentiment. And so today, literally just today, I was with a executive group CEO and his direct staff, talking a little bit about how mature organizations use this stream of value to measure it by starting with your customers' behaviors, things like channel switching. Now, I know Gloria Gupta at the AMA, this is her primary source of data because when a customer switches from a digital to an analog channel, first of all, they're frustrated because they had to switch. And second of all, it's expensive for the company. But others include like product usage, specifically software companies, order velocity for manufacturing companies, a renewal or churn, different types of products ordered, basket size, complaints, all these behaviors, which is really the most important thing we are working on customer experience, is to create better outcomes for customers in terms of their behaviors, which then impacts financials, things like customer lifetime value, annual recurring revenue for all of our SaaS friends out there, net revenue retention, and cost to serve. But these are all outcomes. And so we really get mature on measuring customer experience. We bring in that operational data like customer response time. If we have a customer gives us an issue, how long it takes us to respond. If we have an outage, on-time delivery, product defects, construction delay for a construction company, shipping them the wrong product, all these operations. But what we know is that customers react differently to operational issues. Like if you ship the wrong product, some customers will be completely annoyed, whereas others will just accept it and move on. And that missing link is typically the sentiment. Specifically, Roxy and I are both fans of measuring emotions, ease of doing business, and the customer reference score related to that, customer satisfaction, overall satisfaction. This is what we mean about data. So when I went out and did over 200 interviews with great customer experience leaders, I found the great ones, such as Roxy, really used pieces from all four buckets to measure the customer experience and the outcomes it creates on the organization. And that's what we're going to focus on today. And so I'm going to start out by asking Roxy the big question, which is data. So what?
It's fundamental. The way that I look at it is you always need context. There's always context that's required to know whether the call that you're going to make is in the right direction. It is the right decision, anything along those lines. You have to the situation. And that's what data gives you. All of those different types of data give you a portion of the overall context to what's happening. So not one single data type is sufficient. All of them are required to be able to triangulate and understand what is going on and what you can do to enhance and improve the experience.
And something I found is that when you're talking with your internal stakeholders, they view customer experience data as fuzzy. You come and you share your net promoter score, your customer effort
Mhm.
score, your customer satisfaction. And well, I was talking today with a CFO and a COO, and they didn't yawn at that, but they came kind of close because they don't see that as real data. They see the operational behavioral data and obviously as financial data as real. So, talk about, do you agree with that, Roxy? Tell me your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think that's the bias that there is when it comes to people's feelings, thoughts, and so forth, right? So whether it's survey data or it's anything along those lines, I think that context is critical. But of course, COOs and CFOs are going to look at physical objective metrics, time to resolve, how much revenue are you, annualized recurring revenue, things along those lines. But who the customer is, what resonates with them, how it resonates with them, the manner in which they want to get what they want, whether it's a product or service, those don't come exclusively from operational metrics and financial metrics. So you have to have that other piece. Now, you can weight it differently. So a CFO might weight it a little bit lower than their financial metrics, and that's okay. And an operational leader might weigh up operational metrics more than others. The point is that they take all of it into account. Not, and they don't have to treat it all equally, but you have to look at the whole piece to it. The operational, the behaviors, the perception metrics, or as you have them, sentiment metrics, and then the financials.
What I often say to a leader is that the customer experience data can help provide context to the financial, operational, behavioral data, helping explain why, for example, an outage has the impact on customers it does. Or one of our clients, they're a distributor, they reported a 98% success rate, an on time delivery rate for their delivery on a SKU level. Well, what that meant is they might send a pump, but
Mm,
not the power cord. So not so useful. So the customer
right.
experience data helped to explain why a 98% SKU level on-time delivery sounds really good, but wasn't as powerful as it really should have been. So you know, one of the things that
And
blew
and
me
that
away. Oh, go ahead.
and just sorry to interrupt, but oh, I was sorry. One of the things I think that pump example is really interesting is objectively that's critical because that's what how they look at things at the SKU level. But what it doesn't give is boost to that, like the prioritization, sort of that recipe for success from the customer's perspective. The pump might be important, but there are other things that are more, the relative weight of importance might be different from the customer perspective, and you have to take that into account.
Exactly. We got a bit of a delay here, so I'll just try to remember to pause a little bit. That's fine. So one of the things
Yeah.
that blew me away, I still remember, Roxy, when I visited you a little over 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago now, and you showed me how you had
Yeah.
all this data integrated into your VOC platform. You're able to show everything from ARR, cost implications, who was calling to the contact or to the has service issues, all of this data. And I've rarely seen that elsewhere. I see some data, and I've talked a lot about how Dow has a lot of product availability and complaints data there, but we see it occasionally, but not nearly often enough. I'd love for you to start out by saying, why should the people attending today, why should they try to get all that data into their VOC platform?
Because I think so for me, and and Jim, as you know, I'm a data geek at heart. I always have the next level questions. Like if I see a data point, I'm like, okay, so why? How? What? Like even doing like a five whys, or a five W's type of scenario. And for me, every role I've gone into, my biggest thing is I want to be as versatile and as just in time ready to say what's going on than always doing sort of an after the fact thing of like, well, let me answer this question, but it's going to take me time to get all of the data together, to figure things out and so forth. I want to be able to do things in real time as best as possible. into the mix. And so every time I've gone into a role, I've always said I have to have access to not only the perception metrics, which we will get inherently, but I've got to be able to tether to all of the different systems, whether it's fully into the EDW or the enterprise data warehouse, whether it's to a data lake, whatever the setup is at the company. I just want to get as access to it as possible, even if the data is dirty, right, or it's not fully complete. The closest to understanding the situation is the most powerful to be able to make those real-time decisions in the moment and start to become predictive in how to anticipate experiences when new customers come on board and so forth.
One of the questions I often get is, well, we're already sending our data out into the Power BI, Tableau, into the data warehouse. Why do I need it to come both directions? And for me, beyond what you said, it's really important is that allows you to do more analysis. It changes the way you report. And so what we do is we start with things like, well, our retention rate has dropped by 3% or increased by 5%, starting with what the business cares about. And then you can start with that to care about, then back in and say, and here's what we know about retention based on the customer experience data, because having that data in your platform allows you to do a whole different level of analysis. Is that what you found?
Yeah. Yeah. I am a fan. Yeah. So I'm a fan of structuring the classic VOC dashboard differently, that the VOC metrics are not front and center. It's the operational metrics, the financial metrics, all of that. And then 2 clicks down, 3 clicks down, the CX metrics become one of the explanations for why time to resolve dropped, or time to resolve increased, or ARR, we're seeing an increase in churn, or whatever those metrics are. I'd rather put it front and center that way. What I personally have found is that Power BI and Tableau and other systems aren't as adept at showing CX metrics in a really rich and nuanced way than the classic customer feedback management platforms, whether it's Medallia or Qualtrics, Foresta, whomever. And so that's why I rather play in the sandbox that is a customer feedback management tool, but have that completely integrated, whether it's bi-directional integration or one-way integration to Salesforce, Certinia, BigQuery, whatever those systems are, because then I get to play in a sandbox that is built around the context of CX, but then I can mold the story in the manner that the COO and the CFO wants to see it.
One of my favorite examples of a great dashboard. Yours were great too, but one that had my favorite customer experience business problem ever is just after I left you down in Florida, I went up to Midland, Michigan and spent a couple of days with Dow. And Jen, who at the time led the customer experience program, she's since been promoted, she shared that they had a problem. I said, well, what's that? Well, we only have 1,000 licenses for our dashboard, and we've run out of licenses. Wait, what's that? I said, yeah, we have over 1,000 people logging into our dashboard, and we've had to shut off some of them because we don't have enough licenses. Like, wow, that's my favorite problem ever. I want all of our clients to have that problem. And to your point, the reason was they didn't center it on the VOC topics. They started on what the customer experience, which is on-time delivery and get it right, which means right product, right time, no flaws. And they start with the business outcomes and then use customer experience to help explain it.
Yeah, it is a good problem to have. It's a stressful problem to have because you want exposure. You want as much exposure as possible. So then you have to start to get creative. Then you have to start to, dependent upon financial budget, right, to afford the access to the platform, you sort of have to get creative of like, who can get access to the main one? And then figure out what portion of your main one do you then put on more of an enterprise access system, like whether it's like Power BI or Tableau. So that's what we started to do, was create tethers in Power BI that gave links to say, now to drill down deeper into the why, here's a link. And then it started to create a conversation. So if somebody didn't have access to it, great. We had a conversation with them. We walked them through, and then they understood that setup. So yeah, that's a fun problem to have. It's that's exactly what you want to aspire to.
So Chris asked, do you find service blueprints helpful with everything you're discussing? And I'll start first in this because Chris, I do something a little bit different. That we use a journey map as the first place, and that's how Roxanne actually met, is working with her on journey mapping. And what we do is we
Yeah.
build the journey map first and the different phases. Then in the journey map, we build the into the journey map itself, we build the data. This is the data we want to see. Here's the operational data, the sentiment data. If you look at Do B2B Better, the last chapter, I think it is, we have one that at the time I couldn't say was HPE. Now I can say it was HPE and their data. But we do it first with that. And then what we do is and to get to that point, you have to engage the business to say, what data do we have to reflect these issues? And then what we'll often do from there is we'll use that to start to create a dashboard that has that some of that same data is in the customer journey map, but then to create it more in a dashboard format. So we use not service blueprints, although I think that would work too. We use journey maps to help determine what the customers value. Use that then to determine here's the data, the behavioral and operational data and sentiment that reflects that, and then use that to create a dashboard. I don't know, Roxy, if that's your approach, or how do you go about doing that?
Yeah. Yeah, so what we ended up doing was, so typically with customer feedback management platforms, usually it's structured for the transactional experience that you're looking at. And then you merge all of the data that's relative to that, whether it's a support ticket, whatever the transaction is. What we ended up doing was created in a separate dashboard, sort of a journey dashboard of sorts, to sit there and try to mimic as much what the journey map looked like. So you start, it's a lot of wayfinders dependent upon the tool, because every single person in an organization is not going to have access to every single tool that's available. So you sort of have to create okay, if you're working in a journey mapping tool or a service blueprint tool, or even a process map tool, Lucid charts, whatever, always create the tether and try to get them as close as possible, so that when people see either the static image or can click on the link, they can go, okay, this part of the design, I see what you're looking at to see if it's working or not. And then you say which metrics are used to show whether it's working or not. So then they can go to the Power BI tool or the customer feedback management tool and start to see the nuance to it. So you got to be a really good fan of trying to pivot as best as possible, because no singular system is going to have it all, and just have it as sort of as interconnected as possible to help explain each nuance of the experience.
And there's a conversation going on right now in the CXPA's Daily Digest. And if you're not a CXPA member, what the heck's wrong with you? You got to join. And asking about journey management platforms. And so I'm a fan. I don't get paid for this, but I like Quadient's journey management tool. Now it's a little confusing. Go to the website, you'll see a bunch of mailbox things. You're like, where did Jim send me to? But because they do have a mailbox, they do a lot with communications, including mailboxes. But they also have this really slick journey mapping tool that allows you to integrate the data and has decent visualization. So that's something we found good. I don't know. Do you have a favorite tool you look at for journey mapping, Roxy?
So Quadient's a good one for the really inexpensive. So I'm also very financially prudent and fiscally responsible, because some of these tools are very expensive. We found a lot of really good success with Uxpressia. What was really nice is it can handle graphic images, video images. It does really nicely the swim lanes to be able to show things, and it handles hyperlinks. And so that's what we sort of leveraged successfully, was hyperlinks, so that we can sit there in a swim lane saying, here are the metrics to prove out whether something's working or not. And then we had two hyperlinks, one to a reportable system like a Power BI, because that happened to be universal. So they could see the current state of the data, but then if they wanted to drill down further and they happen to have access to the more drilled down, the more flushed out system, like a Qualtrics or Medallia and so forth, they could click on that. So it was really economical. Like it was, $1,000 per person, really, relative to everything else. So that was a tool that I really liked because it gave a lot of flexibility in file types, which was fabulous.
All right. Kirk, I'm going to get your question in a minute. I'm going to do a background question first before we get there. Um, when I talk with CX folks, the number one objection I get immediately when I talk about data is it's so hard to get the data, that it's owned by IT or perhaps finance or other groups out there, and getting access to it is hard. I'll share mine in a minute about what I do, and maybe it'll be the same as you, Roxy. But can you share, how do you get that permission?
So a lot of conversations. So it's a process. The hardest ones I typically have run into is the financial ones. So getting access to the revenue numbers, things along those lines. And that typically comes down to the CFO and his organization, or his or her organization is curious how you're going to use the financial information, who's going to be exposed to it. Because there's also sometimes where, for terms of financial performance, they don't want to fully disclose all the details to the broader organization at certain points in time because there's reporting requirements. So you sort of have to walk through in a really detailed way. And so I would show like sort of draft images. I was like, this is what I'm going to do with this number. This is how I'm going to analyze it. This is how it's going to be published. And this is and like literally do sort of a journey map of how you're going to display and use your finance information. And then say, let me do this for a subsegment of the customer base and show you how that works. And so typically that'll be a flat file. You upload it, play it around, and then walk them through how it looks like. So that's how I've done the finance piece. The operational data, that one isn't as hard to get access to from people are reticent to create the hook. It's mainly by the IT department, so forth. Where they might have challenges is what's the connection? Is it a bi-directional connect between their system, which catalogs all of the operational data, and yours? Is it one directional? Because what they're worried about is that we might, having access to it, we might alter something incorrectly, and that altered data goes back into the enterprise data warehouse or the data lake. So once you work through how do you have the protections of the data into that mix, that tends to subside the reticence. And again, it's, let me try it on a small sample. Let me show you how this works. Let's flush out all of the kinks of the integration and then go from there. So it's really methodical of a process, but you can chip away with those leaders to get that access in there.
Now, I want to double click on the flat file. So what do you mean by that? What I mean, so an example, we work with a financial services organization, and what they cared about was churn of their advisors. Makes sense. And my hypothesis was that those advisors that churned had told us something that would have predicted their churn. And so what I did first is I actually asked the leadership to predict what they thought in the survey, 27 questions, would predict churn. And they all thought it was product, and commissions. So by getting them interested, I said, okay, let's get a one-time extract of last year's sales and the year before. So we can see the change, we can see people who churned or not. And so what we did is that by one-time extract, we were able then to look at it and to show them that the top drivers of churn from this organization actually were not product. Commission mattered, but broken processes were the best predictors of churn. By doing that and getting them curious, now not only did they agree to let the data be shared more often, they actually approved an extra headcount CX so they could do this more granular, because we did it as a proof of concept. Let's be able to do it more deeply.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, getting a one-time extract is a great way to see, because we did it one other time, and because their survey was bad, it showed that on-time delivery actually led to more churn, which I hope is not the case. And so that case, by having a bad outcome, we're able to say, okay, the data's bad, let's not go forward. But it lets you at a low risk way get to see if there's anything there.
Yeah.
So Kirik
Yeah.
asked,
And especially if
good,
in that analysis I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, especially in that flat file, if you're able to show them something that they didn't know. So that's one of the things in all of my conversations. I have had them do like a listening tour, have them tell me everything that they've generally have been seeing in terms of pattern, in terms of insights. And there's a part of me that sort of tries to hunt for something new as sort of one of those elements into there and say, yep, here's a validation of what you've generally been saying. You know, it might be a little bit more nuanced now with the additional data, but then here's something you haven't been telling me. And that's the hook a lot of times, because then they're like, oh, I didn't realize that. And that's the context. That's why having access to those 4 different data types gives you the context, because nothing is universal in that it applies to the same to every single person. And I'm not saying now you have to create unique experiences for every single person. They need to be scalable and so forth. But so you start to create pattern to the noise. And the only way you can create pattern to the noise is if you have all of the different pieces of the puzzle as best as possible of a representation of what's going on to figure out that pattern and then increase the quality of the experience for that.
So as a teaching somebody new is a key thing. It's what get them interested. As I was saying earlier, that it helps them provide more context with their data. Now, those who are familiar with XM Institute's reporting, they talk about X data versus O data, which basically experience data and
Yeah.
everything else. One of the things that Roxie taught me, along with Andrea Kronberg, who's another technical editor to do B2B Better, is that it's really, you can't treat them all the same. That operational data tells you different things than behavioral data, which again is a form of voice of the customer, which is very different from the outcomes of financial data. And so you really have to look at them distinctly.
Yep. Yep. You never ascribe equal weighting to all data types. You have to sort of figure out certain data types will be weighted more importantly than others. And that's only going to come from running the regression models or whatever types of analyses that you're going to do. That will give you a sense of the relative weight and importance of each data type. And then when you're answering those questions, you know to lean heavier on operational data in that analysis. But then another analysis, you know to weigh in heavily on perception. And that's it. And that's just, you need to get your hands on the data to be able to figure that out and then map out those types of analyses.
So Kirik had asked us, let me get up his actual question, a little bit longer, I'm going to shorten it, but in healthcare, the experience data might not be representative of the system, but of a function or division. So how is the industry challenging and removing the barriers while also looking to provide systems that acquire data across these key listening posts, voicemail, voice, web, SMS, email, surveys, etc., or using voice sentiment analysis to automate data collection and proactively prioritize outreach? I'm going to leave that one for you, Roxie. Go ahead.
So this is when you start to, and we now have the ability to move into this direction a lot faster than we used to. So if you have if the experience data isn't complete, if the experience data is hard to capture dependent upon the vertical, so for example, healthcare, if you are really focusing on physicians, that's a really hard data set of individuals to be able to get experience data. So you start to work into, Jim has heard me say this, sort of the concept of like voice of the silent. And how do you approximate the perception of experience through other data pieces? This takes time to get to that point where you could use behavior as an approximation to experience and start to give sort of a one-to-one type of look into that mix. But the only way you can get to that world, and this is where it gets really messy, and this is when you're sort of going to have to lean into direction and tendency to really sort of figure out, well, we've seen historically that when people behave this way, or they buy this, or they do this, we generally see this type of response from a perception or how they perceive it into that mix. And then you start to create if then statements so that if you're missing parts of the experience data, you can ascribe you can look at the behavior and ascribe an experience score to it, even though you didn't actually capture the experience data from that person. So it's starting to get really interesting with machine learning and other types of techniques to be able to start to do that. It takes data. It takes lots of data to be able to get to that state, but we're moving into that direction, which has been really interesting. So you don't have to worry about completeness. You can work with proportions of data to figure out what's going on. I don't know if that fully answered the question, but hopefully that did.
Sam Wegman at the first Do B2B Better conference we put on showed how they create a synthetic NPS. And she's a distributor. And so what they found is that they look at 1,000 pieces of data, but the three that were most predictive were availability to order, or to promise actually. So if they ask for 1,000 pounds of this solvent, can they say yes by this date? Second of all was on-time delivery. And third was any complaints. And they found that by comparing those three, along with 997 others, but those three were largely, they could fairly well approximate whether somebody was a promoter, detractor, or passive.
Yeah. And that's where the power of regression, the power of predictive analytics, that's where while you might have an ecosystem of data that you've now been able to get access to, the majority of time you're not looking at the entire ecosystem all of this every single time. You'll be able to sit there and say, for this particular experience type, let's say a support ticket, these are the metrics, the operational, the financial, the experience, the behavior that mattered for this experience. And it might be different dependent upon the customer segment, right? It might be different for a large customer, an enterprise customer. If we're thinking B2B, this might be from B2C, an individual that is a very frequent return purchaser of the product and so forth. But then in another interaction type, it might be completely flipped and it's something completely different. So it takes time. So a lot of this work, like when you and I started with the journey mapping with Heart of the Customer and so forth, that was yes, we had all of the data ready to go when we started that work, but the understanding of what mattered most and figuring out all of that pattern to the noise, that took a good couple years. And then we were starting to get into a rhythm of like, yes, okay, now this is what to focus in on. This is how we can quickly enhance the experience and see if this works. This is how, it's starting to get into like a titration type setup. So it's a multi-year commitment. None of this is going to be done within a year into the mix.
Yeah, I typically say it's about 3 years to really get there to get your data in place. So Chris asked if we can share some examples. I hadn't planned to. I'm going to share one here. I want to make really, really, really clear. This is not Roxie's map. It's going to be a software implementation map, but it's actually, we create a fictionalized version. This actual originally map was for a different B2B organization, not software at all. But we had a lot of software companies interested, so we created a hypothetical map. So I want to say one more time, this is not Roxie's map that I'm about to show you. But across here, you can see that we took the journey map. I'm going to first start with the journey map. And Roxie, can you confirm, can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you can see we have the journey, and hopefully instantaneously you can see this is not a good journey. This is very negative on there. And you can see some moments of truth, specifically, why were these resources requested at the beginning? Why didn't Sage fill me in? Not again, why does Sage have to change the date? And towards the end, go live data slipping. 3 moments of truth. We look at the top, we can see, first of all, NPS detractors, 11%. And 65% projects require more resources than originally requested. This is operational data. 45% projects delayed due to stage capacity. Again, operational data. 137% analyst team workload. Then behavioral data, 47% average training completion rate. 55% operational data, implementations in progress will not meet the original go live dates. And then 18% require on-site resources more than a month after implementation. So bringing the different kinds of data using the customer journey to help understand, give context to them. Now, this is not the dashboard that Chris asked for, but this is, first of all, we use as a journey map to help create a dashboard. Now, what I'm going to do is share an example from Dell. Oh, go ahead.
Then what I would do with that type of map is then there would be hyperlinks with those metrics that then would bring people to either a system that everybody has access to, whether it's like Tableau or Power BI, or then the customer feedback management system that goes into the granular pieces. So then they could see easily that phase of the journey, that micro phase is equal to this type of analysis to take a look at what's working and what's not working. So it makes it sort of like a living journey map rather than being a static image.
And so now I'm going to show a wireframe of an actual, let's see, where is it here? Of a dashboard that Dow uses. This is their on-time, their product availability and delivery. Now, again, they don't have permission to share the actual data. You can see that top center is the get it right and on-time delivery data. These are the operational data that is most of interest. Now, on the left of that, they have the CXI scores. They use effectiveness, ease, and enjoyability. On the right, this is obviously from 4 years ago, their priorities for integrated supply chain. Then on the bottom, they have some more transactional data, on-time delivery confidence score. They found that clients' confidence in Dow as a supplier was very predictive of future orders. Product availability confidence score, complaint satisfaction score, and then complaint experience score overall. And so this is the fabled dashboard that got over 1,000 views a quarter. In fact, Ricardo confirmed 3 years later, it was still getting over 1,000 views per quarter because it doesn't focus on our data, although it includes it. It focuses on answering the questions executives have about the experience, highlighting, in this case, the operational data.
Mm-hmm. And then the critical piece, and I know Ricardo and team do this, is that image that you saw, really invest in what types of filters to have at the top of the dashboard so that you can start to easily compare and contrast those metrics based off of segment type. So it could be the market segment for your customer base. It could be tenure that the customer has with the organization, because that's the next layer of nuance, because that's going to show the overall landscape at a moment in time. And then what you want to do is start to see, is this equivalent in impact to every single customer type, every single nuance that you're looking at? Is it trending over time the same? So that's like the next layer of analysis that you set up in that dashboard to really give that attention to detail.
Yeah, I left out a fifth type of data, which is descriptive data. And that is, for example, your customer segments, maybe your regions, everything else. So what descriptive data did you use?
For B2B, it's nuanced because you're going to look at things at the account level. So this is going to be the account market segment, the account tenure, all of the number of products, which products, all of that type of stuff, ARR at the account level. But then you also need at the individual user level, because we were in a software industry. So that's going to be the administrator of the technology, because they have relationships with a B2B SaaS company. So you have to then look at them and their role. Are they a decision maker, or are they just a user of the system? how long have they been using the system, like all of those pieces. So the most that we could get, we even got down to certifications. What certifications do they have in the particular industry? Because certifications gave an understanding of their level of knowledge of using the software, which is a factor that impacts how they handle releases when new releases of the product comes out, and how do you deliver that to them. So we tried to collect as much as we could get our hands on.
And you remind me of something else is really important is the role. We worked with a different software company, and when we looked, we ran their surveys
Mm,
for them, and we found dramatic differences between the decision makers from the influencers from the users. The influencers being
mhm.
the least satisfied because the implementation process was hard, and the executives didn't have to deal with that, and the
Yep.
users didn't have to deal with that. It was the influencers who were really hit hard.
Yeah. And then that's when you have to be really adept at weighting data and weighting who the information is coming from. Is it the influencer or the admin? Is it the decision maker? But then what the kicker is even if the admin, let's say you're weighting them 30%, 70%. So 70% decision maker, because they're the ones that sign the contract, right? In terms of the mix, what starts to get even more interesting is, well, how many admins are using the system within the company? And then because you can start to have a power of numbers. So even the 30% is only 30% of the impact. If you're talking, it's only 10 people versus 200 admins, depending upon the size of the customer, that has a completely different impact level where they're complaining in the phase of the experience, right? So if they're doing it in implementation, there's always challenges with implementation. It's the most painful part of the experience. But if you're starting to see it in other phases of the journey and closer to renewal time and all of that, like everything starts to become very nuanced with how you incorporate their perception of the experience and how much impact it has to the overall ecosystem when you're dealing with the decision maker when you're doing the renewal conversation.
Chris got me going now. So I'm going to share another example. We talk about roles. This is from a webinar we did a little over a year ago with Hewlett Packard Enterprises. And this is the map, not the dashboard.
Mm,
But you can see they had two different roles. They had the operations manager versus Alex, the CIO. And the
yeah.
first thing you may notice is along the top, they had NPS detractors, percent quoted in less than 3 days, on time installations, connected devices, B2B resolution, first time fixed, renewal rate. Um, but what they didn't have was any data for Alex. They really, as you can
Mm,
see here, Alex is missing much of the experience here. And this journey map helped them recognize that they needed to really change the experience to be able to give one to Alex. And so then what we did next is we did a future state vision of what the experience could be. And um, this is all from their previous webinar they gave us. And so now if I show the future state vision of it, um, you can see for they identified here are actually what we want to measure at the CIO level, a whole different set of data. They also changed what it was for Phil. They came up with a plan for how they're going to create an experience for Alex and how they're going to measure it. And so HPE is a great example of an organization that was
mm.
very deliberate about the operational data that surrounds their experience and how we're going to measure it and integrate it in with our overall customer experience measurement. And so now we turn to the other question I often get. The first one is first question we get is how do I get access to data? The second is more of a statement, which is our data is so bad. We really get it because we're still trying to figure our data. We're years away from getting perfect data. You referenced a little bit about this earlier, Roxy, but tell us what you say to somebody who says, I have bad data.
Yeah, so I feel their pain. As a fellow perfectionist, I feel that a lot. I remember when I was first starting, I was very, especially coming from academic roots, was very like p-value's got to be below 0.05 to show significance. You have to have complete data sets, like the whole perfection thing. You can only analyze unless you know everything that's going on. So of course, there's the adage of don't let perfection be the enemy of good, and all of that type of stuff. And I started to really embrace that you don't need a complete story to figure out generally what's going on. Say, for example, there's the SMB market. So I'm using this for B2B, or if it's a B2C example, it's a customer segment that the company hasn't really penetrated into, right? And really sort of had them really sort of adopting the products that they're selling. You can work with the other segments, right? So like that's how I sort of looked at it. I was like, okay, even the experience that I'm trying to create for this segment that I don't have full complete data on and so forth, even me using other segment types as an approximation of what's going on. And I could sort of see that the general direction, even if the data is messy, heading into what I think is it's looking like, you can feel comfortable to run and do a pilot, a CX lab of sorts. Figure out if that experience is working for that part of the data points you don't have access to, and see if it's working, and then start to play around and enhance on it. So a lot of this is sort of like an innovation lab of sorts. You're not going to always have everything. You're going to have hypotheses. You're going to use other segments where you might have more complete data than others to make those hypotheses. And then the thing is, it's powerful is if you're a company that leans into the voice of the customer, that the customer is a partner in this process, they're going to want to do this with you. If you communicate with them and say, we're piloting this, we're figuring out if this works, we might not get it right at the outset, but tell us what's going on, then you're going to start to amass the data so that you can feel more confident that this direction and something that was a little bit of a guess is the right direction to go into. So you have to be comfortable with uncertainty, but use other data points to sort of approximate what you think is the right decision. Tell customers that you're testing this out. They're more than happy to be a part of that process, and then work with them. So that's sort of a way to get around that without sitting there and saying, well, I can't make this change until I have complete data certainty, because you're never going to have that ever. So that's sort of the thing that you just have to really lean into, is the uncertainty, but with confidence. We're all CX professionals. We all know what feels right. Lean into it. Communicate clearly with customers that you're trying this out, and they'll be a
All right. So our last question is from Kirk. Again, he's saying, do you envision a world where experience can be reviewed and partially automated and prioritized using large language models that are used to detect negative emotion? And Kirk, I'm going to scale it
yeah.
up a little bit from there, because it's not just negative; it's also potential to accentuate the positive. And what I've seen, at least, is for the last 4 years, 5 years, journey orchestration is almost going to happen. We had Medallia and Qualtrics each
Mhm.
buy products that could do that, and yet it hasn't happened. And partly we have an issue with data, partly we have an issue with AI. But my view of the world is the biggest one is permissions. So first of all, who would buy such a product that could do this? CX wouldn't.
Mm.
CX can't change experience. Would it be operations? Would it be sales? Would it be digital? There actually are platforms out there that can do some orchestration work. Again, both Medallia and Qualtrics have them. But the biggest issue to me is the organizational will to turn the experience over to a predictive platform. So I don't know your thoughts on that, Roxy.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have to deal with how well the models look. Do you have, right, like the hallucination factor and like all of these different types of nuances. I'm Are we there yet now? No. Will we get there? Definitely. Into the mix where I lean into automations and generative AI and so forth is speeding up the pace of figuring out what's going on to then start to ideate and design a better experience. So, especially when you are amassing a ton of qualitative data, to now put it through NLP, natural language processing, or different large language models, the speed by doing that is amazing. Now, do we just solely rely on that? No. Typically, then you'll do human gut checks, right? Like as we always did. Remember inter-rater reliability, and you would never code something without having 10% of it being coded by somebody else to see how consistent you are. Like those things are still needing to be done because we have to continue to iron out the kinks and tweak things. But for me, I'm like, great. Does this mean that I can get the insight faster and then start to figure out and design a better experience? I'll lean into it, fully knowing again, it's not going to be 100% perfect because the other data that we've been dealing with for decades hasn't been perfect. Like this isn't a new problem, it's just a different type of the same experience that we all have. We're washed with data, complete, incomplete data, structured, unstructured, all of these different ways to analyze it. And now what's happening is those ways to analyze it is being done in a hyper focused or hyper clip in terms of time. So let's get faster to insight and faster to testing things and then go, and go from there. So I'm leaning in as hard as possible into how to be faster to design something and test if it works. The classic grain of salt that you're going to always have to have, no matter what type of data point or analysis you use.
And so when I look at this space of journey orchestration, I was watching quite carefully and closely as Medallion and Qualtrics both bought platforms and predicted it wouldn't go well. Not because they're bad platforms, but because CX doesn't buy orchestration. And that is done more, I'm not sure who does it. It's definitely not CX, more on the operations side, or it could be on the data side, like a chief data officer. And my concern about orchestration is it could actually cut CX off instead of having a team of experienced designers who take the voice of the customer in and really think it through. It could be done by data geeks who say, "Hey, let's just try doing these things and see if it works," without having that background of what customers value. And that to me is a warning sign for CX about journey orchestration.
Yep. Yep.
All right.
And that's the situation of they just take the hard numbers and make decisions off the hard numbers, but without the explanation, the context to what the numbers mean. And that's our role, is to explain that nuance and that context there.
Exactly. We have those four types of data, and they all matter. But in most organizations, the three, financial, operational, behavior, are looked at together without bringing in our data. And that's the call to action for you, is to look at how can I get my data into the mix? How can I take their data, make it part of my analysis? How to get my data to be part of their analysis? If you'd like to talk more about that, about how you can really help understand your journey and the data role it, or how you can create dashboards that really drive the organization through incorporating all four types of data, I'd love to talk to you about that. So as we wrap up here, Roxy, I just want to say thank you. This hour's gone by so quickly. I really appreciate you sharing your experience with data. Somebody wants to reach out to you. What's the best way?
LinkedIn. So just connect with me on LinkedIn, and more than happy to have the conversation.
Excellent. Same with me. I'm at jim@heartofthecustomer.com. You can email me or hit me up on LinkedIn. And wishing you all the best to make your data really a game changer in customer experience.